Okay, we're given the contents of the nutritional breakdown for fat-free and for regular coffee creamer. Fat-free coffee creamer contains milk, so we also have the breakdown for milk in case that becomes useful. We're also given the fact that fat contains 9 calories per gram, sugars 4 calories per gram, protein 4 calories per gram. First question we have, how much fat is there in 1 ounce of regular? Now, the other thing that I haven't yet mentioned is all these numbers are rounded to the nearest whole number. More specifically and more correctly, these amounts, all the amounts in grams, are rounded to the nearest whole number. These results are pretty close. They're rounded, but they actually are pretty close to the whole number. So, again, the question is, how much fat is there in 1 ounce of regular coffee creamer? Well, it says 2 grams of fat. Let's ignore the fact that the 2 grams of saturated and 1 gram of unsaturated that constitute that 2 grams appears to be 3 grams. So unless we have some kind of a violation of a conservation law, there appears to be a discrepancy. But the fact of the rounding comes close to explaining a bit about that discrepancy. So, how much fat in 1 ounce of regular? Just how much fat? And let's just go with the idea that the 2 grams is correctly rounded. Then that means, well, what's the smallest amount that would round to 1 gram, and or to 2 grams, and what's the largest amount that could round to 2 grams? Well, 1.5 grams rounds to 2 grams. Nothing less than 1.5 grams rounds to 2 grams. That would start with 1.4 something at the very most. So it would round down to 1 gram. Also, 2.5 grams would round to 3 grams, but anything less than 2.5 grams is going to round down to 2 grams. So we know it's at least 1.5 grams. It's less than 2.5 grams. How about the amount of sugar in 1 ounce of fat-free? Well, again, we have 2 grams here, so the amount of sugar is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 grams. Could be equal to 1.5 grams, has to be less than 2.5 grams. So the next question is, what's the difference between these two, between fat-free and sugar regular, between the fat content and between the sugar content? Well, if we take this at face value, and we really can't, but we'll see that shortly, but if we take this at face value, if these are the numbers, then there's a trade-off in fat content. There's no fat here, and there's between 1.5 and 2.5 grams of fat here, so the difference is between 1.5 and 2.5 grams. And the less than equal here, the less than here. That's not particularly important for this application, but it's a good idea to be in the habit of keeping track of that. And sugar content, well, if we assume there's no sugar, and we haven't really concluded that, but if we assume there's no sugar, then the difference is the same, except, of course, we're trading now sugar. Well, that's the change in sugar content, okay, difference in sugar content between 1.5 and 2.5 grams. Now this assuming no sugar in the regular. Now, I didn't list it. That doesn't mean it's not there, and that doesn't mean evidence for it is not there. Okay, now we're going to try to make some value judgments, and anytime we make value judgments, we'd better be very clear about our assumptions. So we're going to assume that corn sweetener is bad. Okay, there's a fair amount of scientific evidence for that. Fat may be bad. We've assumed for a long time that fat is undeniably bad, but that's been mitigated lately. Certain types of fats are actually thought to be good for you. Other types are still thought to be bad. So we'll say maybe bad, depending on what kind of fat, and we probably won't get into that question, but it's worth researching. And calories. Now, if you're 40 pounds underweight, calories are good. Some kinds of calories better for you than others. Again, you got to make some assumptions and consult the research and see what your best guess is. But we are going to assume, though, that somebody who's considering the switch wants to control their weight, so we're going to assume that calories, in this case, are bad. So, if we trade fat-free for regular, okay? Now, fat-free has more fat, regular has more sugar. So we're trading fat for corn sweetener, and in this case, we're trading fat for corn sweetener, okay? Or for sugars. Also, we can't necessarily assume that all the sugar in fat-free is in the corn sweetener. There's milk there, and milk has sugars that aren't corn sweetener. So it gets a little complicated. Let's just take the simple numbers. How much fat's being traded for how much sugar? Well, we're trading at least how much fat for at most how much sugar. Let's put it that way. Well, we're trading at least 1.5 grams of fat because there's that much fat in, if we're trading fat-free for regular, hang on a minute, I might have that backwards. Okay, well, the way I stated it, we'll stick with that. At least how much fat for at most how much sugar. So we're losing at least 1.5 grams of fat because there are at least 1.5 grams of fat in the corn sweetener. And we're gaining at most 2.5 grams of sugar. Now, if we trade regular for fat-free, okay, we're trading at least how much sugar for at most how much fat. Well, the numbers are kind of symmetric here. There's at least 1.5 grams of sugar in the fat-free, and at most 2.5 grams of fat in the regular. Okay, well, that's all well and good, but we really haven't addressed the fact that, well, the thing we really want to think about is how much fat, and even maybe of what kind, are we trading for how much corn sweetener? Because we're going to assume that other sugars are more or less a wash. They aren't really bad, they aren't really good, or maybe they're even good, depending on the kind of sugars. But we do have evidence that corn sweetener is bad stuff. So how do we modify this if we want to consider trade-offs between fat and corn sweetener? Now, the analysis could go somewhat deeper. If we analyze fat-free milk a little more extensively, we can see that you have at least 1.5 grams of sugar, at most 2.5. At 4 calories per gram, you conclude that there are 6 calories, well, the sugar calories are greater than or equal to 6, but less than 10. 2.5 times 4 is 10, 1.5 times 4 is 6. And protein calories, you have between 0.5 and 1.5 grams of protein. 0.5 grams of protein would be 2 calories. 6 calories would correspond to 1.5 grams. And so this leads to the conclusion that if there's nothing but milk and corn sweetener in here and 2 grams of sugars and 1 gram of protein, that your total number of calories has to be greater than or equal to 6 plus 2, which is 8, less than or equal to 10 plus 6, which is 16. Of course, the label lists 20 calories, so we have some idea of just how reliable these labelings are, or maybe how reliable I was in conveying those numbers. Something's amiss here, although not too seriously. It's 20 can't be less than 16. Okay, it's certainly greater than or equal to 8, but it can't be less than 16. So something is wrong here. In any case, deciding that's a minor problem, let's look at something else. The protein, we have 1 gram of protein here, which means it's between 1/2 and 1.5 grams. So the protein has to be at least 1/2 gram. Now, there's no protein from the corn sweetener. It's all got to come from the milk. And 8 ounces of milk has 8 grams of protein, which means 1 ounce of milk would have 1 gram of protein. And to get 1/2 gram of protein, which is the least you could have, you have to have at least then 1/2 ounce of milk. If you have 1/2 ounce of milk, then you have, turns out, about 0.7 grams of sugars. You could do that. 1/2 ounce is 1/16 of 8 ounces. 11 over 16 is around 0.7. So you get about 0.7 grams of milk sugars. You can easily calculate that. And that would imply that since you have at most 2.5 grams of sugars, that 0.7 of those 2.5 grams are milk sugars, which means coarse sweeteners are not over 1.8 grams. So, means if you go from regular to fat-free, you're giving up at least 1.5 grams of fat, but you're gaining at most 1.8 grams of corn sweetener. Now, you could also see what the least amount of corn sweetener you might have would be. That would correspond to what happens if you have 1.5 grams of protein here, and that would potentially account for most or even all of your sugars, but we know there's more corn sweetener than there. We suspect there's more corn sweetener than that, just from the texture of the product. Still, we wouldn't be able to come up with a really great number for that. So it's conceivable that there's less than 1.8 grams of corn sweetener, and it could conceivably be pretty minimal. We don't know from the information we're given. Another complete contradiction. Now, whether that's the result of fancy labeling and tricks that the food industry wants to play, or just plain old bad science on the part of the food industries, or just plain old bad reporting of what I thought I saw when I read the labels, and I have no idea which. I could easily believe any of those scenarios, but the regular fat-free could have at most 2.5 grams of fat and at most 1.5 grams of protein, and that would account for only 29 calories. You can do the arithmetic, about 29 calories, but we report 40 calories. Now, where did the other 11 calories come from? Well, very possibly from sugars. I didn't report the sugars. Well, that could maybe be about 3 grams of some kind of carbohydrates, milk sugars, because you expect that there's milk in half and half. Matter of fact, you could actually quantify that. So I don't have complete information here. So I'm just pointing out ways that you would need to go about analyzing these facts and other facts that might well be given on the labels of the various products, in order to come to some conclusions about the relative benefits of fat-free versus regular coffee creamer. Rather, fat-free versus regular half and half, because that's actually what this is, half and half. My wife uses it for coffee creamer, and that's where all this came from. Now, none of this extended analysis was included in the question on the test, although, well, could have. I chose to keep the question fairly simple. So if you're able to answer the simpler question, then you would have been fine.